Hello and welcome to the Dugout. This episode, we're gonna be hitting y'all with the here for Q&A. We've got some questions from some of y'all, listeners and friends and families. So now we're excited to get into. How are you feeling, Prince?
I feel good. It already feels like season 2 has been so long, but it's only April. But maybe that's just the times that we're in, and also the fact that we're posting every week. But I feel good, and I'd like seeing what people's questions are. How do you feel about 2025 so far?
We're third of the way through. It's kind of crazy to think about that. Because for me, 2025 didn't really start until Trump came into office, and then it hasn't really felt like it's moved since January still. But I think that's just the way that pressures around you can distort and constort time, and how that just feels in the body, and how that feels to then manage and juggle for things. Because I'm sure that's different for a whole lot of people. Yeah, season 2, though, I feel like it has been poppin', but always congratulations to you posting weekly over on that Prince Secure YouTube channel as well. So
Well,
let's rub some numbers out.
here's a more pointed, shady question. How do you feel about graphics? I feel like you've been improving. Where are you at with that? Because you've been putting some work in.
Yes, but did I hit the metrics I'd want to hit by this point in the quarter and this point this season? No. Am I a lot more comfortable? Yes. I bumped out a graphic because I knew I had to in like half an hour the other week, and I was already behind on so many other administrative things. Give yourself time to marinate in the skills you want to do.
Here's a question that's on our list. Do you have a favorite episode of season 2 so far? Like, I feel like we've done so much, but what sticks out to you so far?
My favorite episodes aren't out yet. Wait, when does this one come out? Yeah, I would say that's out. The Jordan episode. The War Pony episode. And then we have another interview that's gonna come out that I think it is my favorite, with Nia. Like, I think every time we do an interview, I'm like, damn, this one's my favorite. Because the Jamal, the Jonina, the Nia, the Jordan, they're all like my favorite episodes.
I think our media episodes have been kind of fun, and maybe that's kind of why I think we've been talking about doing more. Like the Black Panther one was fun, just because when I'm thinking back to recording those and how much we talked shit and laughed, and I don't know, it felt like a more innocent time. But it was just fun, and I feel like, I don't know, talking shit about media that's related to Black history that you've studied enough about. It's not like I'm an expert, but do I love talking shit? Yes. So that, I mean, I like that one. And of course, the Jamal Joseph episode is a favorite. I've enjoyed doing the Direct Action 101 videos. Like, they're a lot of work for sure. The mutual aid one, especially since it's come out, even though it hasn't gotten the numbers I imagined, it's like whatever does when you're trying to post stuff online. But I do kind of see the reach and the utility of it, because, oh yeah, I haven't really seen as comprehensive of a breakdown of mutual aid in this format, in this way. Not saying that there aren't conversations or elsewhere about it, but it does feel like something that's very much a sort of, yeah, potential pillar for people that really want to learn.
And I've been getting great feedback from the people in real life, online, that are like, this is succinct, this is a good format, it's engaging. And yeah, like I've been getting DMs about your videos. I'm pretty sure I know someone's printing transcripts of parts of it. Yeah, Zinesters go hard.
Oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? Shit, maybe I should turn it into a little, yeah, whatever. That's for the website.
So we have a couple questions that we've aggregated from y'all over the couple of months, and I kind of want to start with one that we've actually gotten since we've started the pod, like a couple months in. Somebody asked us this question, And now we have it again, which is, what is our opinion, or how do we respond to Huey Newton's critique of anarchism at the time? And I guess just to introduce that text that's being referenced a bit, they're referencing Huey Newton's letter that was written in November 1968. And it was called On Anarchism and Individualism, I believe.
This is a piece from Huey Newton that was in the Black Panther newspaper. So this was written in 1968. And I think it's important that the context of this time is that the Vietnam and anti-war movements and pro-worker movements were kind of rising up in the US and around the world. And so it's important to kind of engage with this text, I think, in terms of there being so many different movements, like the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the Black Panther movement. How would you describe this piece in general?
I would describe it as a piece that it definitely feels like it's from and talking about the anarchist movement in the 68s. His critiques are about, it doesn't seem like the anarchists actually want to break down the imperial system. And I think from the timeline of this, the Weather Underground starts popping off harder at the imperial core. And they cite, even though a lot of them weren't anarchists, but they still cite the Black Panther Party as being a drive towards the global fascist and imperialist machine and taking down that machinery. But it's based on a couple of conflations that I've seen in a lot of pieces that talk about anarchism, like not comparing Huey to Stalin at all. But if you've read some of Lenin and Stalin's critiques of anarchism, like some of them are well-meaning, but a lot of them are straw mans. Like there's anarchists hate organization. It's all from the rich white people, and their individual liberties are being, they see the glass ceiling and they know they can break it. So of course they want a non-state now. They want their individual freedom, and they don't know how to fight collectively. And it's just, that is a branch of anarchists, but there is also so much more and beyond that. And I think there were responses that you found that were in, like, responding to this piece by Murray Bookchin. Did you finish that or read that?
Found the response interesting and valid, and the Huey Newton piece reads, "We should understand there is a difference between the rebellion of the anarchists and the Black Revolution or liberation of the Black colony. This is a class society. It always has been. This reactionary class society places its limitations on individuals, not just in terms of their occupation, but also regarding self-expression, being mobile, and being free to really be creative and do anything they want to do. The class society prevents this. This is true not only for the mass of the lower or subjugated class, it is also true within the ruling class, the master class. That class also limits the freedom of the individual souls of the people which comprise it. In the upper class, the individuals always try to free themselves from these limitations, the artificial limitations placed on him through external sources, namely some hierarchy that goes by the name of state or governmental administration." And then I'll go down a little further because there's other parts of this that I find a bit more interesting. This brings about another problem. There being, meaning like the ruling class or people that can be considered a part of the ruling class or the ruling class hierarchy, they're being ruled by an alien source that has nothing to do with freedom of individual expression. They want to escape this, to overturn this, but they see no need to form, well, actually he's talking about anarchists, they see no need to form a structure or real disciplined vanguard movement. Their reasoning is that by setting up a disciplined organization, they feel they're replacing the old structure with other limitations. They fear they'd be setting themselves up as directing the people, therefore limiting the individual again. But what they don't understand, or it seems they don't understand, is as long as the military-industrial complex exists, then the structure of oppression of the individual continue. An individual would be threatened even if he were to achieve his freedom he's seeking. He'll be threatened because there will be an organized lower group. They're ready to strip him of his individual freedom at any limit. In Cuba, they had a revolution. They had a vanguard group that was a disciplined group, and they realized that the state won't disappear until imperialism is completely wiped out, structurally and philosophically, or the bourgeois thoughts won't be changed. Once imperialism is wiped out, they can have their communist state, and the state or territorial boundaries will disappear. In this country, the anarchists seem to feel that if they just express themselves individually and tend to ignore the limitations imposed on them without leadership and without discipline, they can oppose the very disciplined, organized reactionary state. This is not true. They will be oppressed as long as imperialism exists. They cannot oppose a system which, as this is to oppose it, with organization that's even more extremely disciplined and dedicated than the structure you're opposing. There's a lot of meat here. And I find what Huey's saying to be really interesting. And if I would just distill it down, he's basically saying that being an anarchist means that you're not into organizational structures, and that therefore means you're not disciplined. That basic thesis, that basic assumption, that basic assertion, to me is false, because I look at anarchism throughout all different parts of history, and as we've talked about, co-ops, mutual aid, federated structures of decision making, how people come together and have community councils, like maroon societies, the like Underground Railroad, all of these anarchist structures I think have existed alongside other organizations. And so to make the assumption that it's undisciplined, I think is not a critique in good faith. It's more of a critique of, I think, white radical violence or white radical action or non-black radical action, which I think is one in itself something interesting. To have a revolutionary vanguard therefore means you are disciplined, and being disciplined in itself gives you a leg up on anarchists, like in the sense of how Huey's describing, like having a vanguard. But I think what history kind of shows us on a certain level is, yeah, having a vanguard does give a movement legibility. It does give people a certain kind of buy-in, but it also leaves certain leaders to be picked off. It makes it easier to survey people. It made Quintel Pro, in the way that it was at the time, more possible, and it laid the groundwork for us to have security culture in the ways that a lot of leftist spaces do. So it's interesting to not necessarily analyze this from the perspective of like, what is Huey criticizing in his time? But I think of it in terms of like, what does history show us? How does history and what happened after this actually critique what Huey is saying? How does it disprove what he's saying? And I'm like,
This is 3 years after Sastre opened the bookstore.
mm-hmm.
So I just think about that too, of like, and then the different ways that the West and East Coast Panthers related to certain things and kind of the lineages there. I kind of think about that. But I also really appreciate how he ended it too, which was, quote, "How can they expect the individual freedom when the imperialists oppress whole nations of people? Until we gain liberation as a group, they won't gain any liberation as individual people. So this makes our fight the same, and we must keep this in perspective and always see the similarities and the differences in it. There's a tremendous amount of difference in it, and there's a due amount of similarity between the two cases. Both are striving for freedom, and both are striving for liberation of their people. Only one is advanced to a higher degree than the other. The anarchists are advanced a step higher, but only in theory. As far as actuality of conditions, they shouldn't be advanced higher because they should see the necessity of wiping out the imperialist structure, and by organized groups, just as we must be organized." And you found Murray Bookchin's thing, and my favorite part of Murray Bookchin's response to this is they're like, Huey's plea to wipe out imperialist structures completely. No serious anarchist that I know that actually talks about revolution, especially when you're talking about like revolutionary anarchists, because I think there is a difference, and some anarchists that, for some logical reason, just won't fight for revolution. I think that's a perfect critique on them and the milieu of anarchism at the time, most likely. Just thinking about the trends and the trends that early Black anarchists were fighting within anarchist and classical European anarchist spaces too. And I just see like a lot of this piece as a synthesis with like the Black Panther Party, like the anarcho-pantheristas that have come out, like Alston and Jonina and those kind of folks, where their brand of anarchism takes the best parts of the Black Panther Party's Maoism
Yeah.
and just continues in the lens of Black autonomy and intercommunalism and
Yeah.
like the foundations that folks were laying this.
Well, what do you think about, it's interesting to me reading this now, because if we look at what Huey's writing in another crude way, you could say he's a leftist criticizing other leftists that have a more left framework on a certain level. And he's talking about the failures of this further left section in not being able to present structure and not being able to present organization and not being able to resist the crisis of the times. Isn't that a similar critique to what is being leveled against anarchists today? And would it not be just as valid in terms of all the things that we've talked about?
I think it's a little different today. I feel like there's especially because of the internationalism that the internet has allowed, we have a much more well-informed archive and history on organizational anarchists and other cultures that are anarchic and more communalist and with like more like autonomous federated structures that were beyond what the Republic of the United States told us a federated structure should fucking look like. Um, that I kind of had the theory that a lot more communists are a lot more libertarian than they'd ever like to admit. They just don't know the Haymarket affair was actually anarchist. They don't know that the labor movement in the 19th to early 20th century was full of anarchists. And like there is a history when anarchists were organizing heavy. And there's actually this new book that came out that I think I put it in the newsletter, which folks should go check it out. Talks about the use of counterinsurgent and anti-indigenous um, violence and the use of that to lead up to state repression, to international policing, to then like kicking out the anarchists and immigration and ICE and the anarchists in Russia and Mexico. One of our first mass deportations was anarchists to Mexico because they were having a revolution against their fucking country that was pretty much doing what Trump's trying to do with our Constitution now. They're playing the playbooks with the generals and using the false liberties of a constitution to try to maybe yerk more terms out of it. But I think it's something that I really only hear with people's chest online.
Mm,
And because I think it's because probably the kind of anarchists I actually hang out with.
okay.
What about you? Do you think this is how we're being treated still?
I mean, it's interesting one that you say online, because I mean, I feel like online, I definitely agree. When I think of the radical media space, it either seems to be people that are genuinely interested in having conversations versus people that are versus people that are trying to find the most strategic way forward. And I do think sometimes when people argue strategy so much on a front facing level in order to bring people into their politics more, it does dilute some of the honesty and authenticity. And not saying that Huey Newton isn't being honest or authentic and the Black Panther Party wasn't, but I think some of their discipline tried to quell dissenting opinions within the party, and how that to me is almost like, I don't know, it's almost like I can understand the critique, but the critique to me doesn't really hold up against the ways that I think anarchism helps people survive organizations and what organizations are incapable of confronting or making possible. But I do think in terms of like looking at anti-fascism and how I view maybe the far left's responsibility as being some of the folks that are really dedicated to anti-fascism. Is it a failure that Trump is in office right now, or is it just simply this American project doing what is possible? And regardless, there are these structures and people fighting in the center left and far left. And so in a way, I'm almost like, yeah, to your point, the critique doesn't really hold steady for me, because even if people could say like Trump won because the left is losing, but I'm more like the pieces of our humanity that are surviving right now are probably surviving because of the work of people that are dedicated to liberation or revolution or far leftism or whatever it is. And so to me, it's almost like the chicken or the egg. The only reason you or I are here is because these movements have survived enough for us to participate and engage and learn. So that means not as much because it doesn't have a legible vanguard, but I'm like, they killed our fucking vanguard.
And if we've learned anything from that, a vanguard should be a movement, not a party. I'm anti-vanguard party over here. Surprise.
Question from our dear comrade, Lucretia McEvil, is how does your blackness influence your anarchism? How does your anarchism influence your blackness? Is there a separation?
Yeah. Okay. So I have been struggling to answer questions like these recently, only because I feel like I've been wanting to do a lot, like find more language again, which means I've been going back into my study bag and just like reading a lot of things that have brought me to where I am today. Someone else wrote something. It's also in the newsletter. I can't. A disorder, where they talk about like hierarchical state structures and blackness and like the political sense and how that influences my anarchism for sure. And it reminds me of like William C. Anderson, Zoe Samduzi's books and works the past couple years, where and kind of from that like Afro pessimist strain where I'm like, it really does affect how I approach any political structuring, but the separation in them, I think there is like a huge separation in them, in that like roots in a tree. Like there's multiple different roots that define me and give me nutrients and connect me to different other trees. And some of them cross paths multiple times before they ever cross me. They still come up to my root in my trunk. That's kind of how I feel about my anarchism, my blackness, my black anarchism.
Here's what I'll say. You didn't answer the question. You described their relationality or the potential of their relationality, but what actually is it? You said it's a tree, there's roots, they're all connected, we're vibing, I'm the truck. I'm like, girl, what does that mean? So I don't know. What does that mean? How do they actually influence each other? Because you described the relationship, but you didn't define the relationship they have between each other.
I just don't know if there's any consistency in it for me to like know how to map it and give it that language right now. I just know that it's like a very layered process that is pulling from a lot of different sources of wealth and knowledge systems. Because I guess to me, they're both kind of indicators that allow me into a knowledge system and into a base and give me trust and familiarity
Okay.
and identity and something communal but individual, something that I could see the synthesis of all those, but still be able to pull them apart to different origins. What about you? Or is that another non-answer?
No, I like that answer. It's not like I need to like your answers, but I was listening to you the first time and I'm like, so you're a tree. I mean, I really like this question. I don't know. I guess I was thinking about it on like a literary level or how my writer brain thinks of it. But if I were to respond to this in an essay, I would probably talk about how both my blackness and my anarchism brings me closer to and further away from life. Meaning there are ways that being black makes it more possible for me to be dead or to be killed or I shouldn't exist. There are ways that anarchism puts me in opposition to the state and all of these forces that are also attacking blackness, but they both also teach me how to live. Like I think blackness helps me show up in the world in a way where I both accept the celebration of it, but also how it can be an antagonism to other people. And some of that is, I think, rightfully so, and some of it is unearned, but navigating my relationship to both the celebration and the ways that the world tries to destroy something, I think they both relate to that very much. And yeah, and I think when I'm more in tune with my blackness and my anarchism, it usually means I'm a lot more vocal, a lot more snappy, a lot more whatever the fuck you want to call it. Like, I feel like whenever there's been some big urban rebellion or something, or I think about like 2016 or 2020, I would always say, oh, my ancestors, I can feel them speaking through me. And that usually meant, don't fucking try me today. And is there a separation? I find that even more interesting.
That's the question I answered.
I think so. So I do think there are parts of me where I think blackness sometimes makes me feel limited in certain political spaces, and anarchism allows me to kind of deviate from that like perceived limitation, meaning like black people are targeted more by the state. Sometimes when you're at a protest, they say white bodies to the front, but what if you're black and you do want to fuck shit up? But I don't know. And like, there's so many different versions of that scenario. And I think in that scenario, sometimes I have to remove the part of my blackness where I'm like, well, I need to make it home and these white people are going to make it home. And instead I could be like, but I deserve to live. So if I'm going to die, let it be like Claude McKay talks about. So I don't know. I think there's the separation in that sense. Like sometimes being black means I want to survive as long as I can because we don't get to, but then my anarchism kind of tells me, fuck it. Okay, another question.
Weird Ashes said, "Who are some of the earliest black anarchists that you admire, and what are some of the earliest movements that inspired you?"
Earliest black anarchists. I feel like I'm thinking like there were people that were but that exhibited anarchistic behavior, but I'm like, did they identify as black anarchists?
Yeah, like who knows what CLR James was thinking right before he died?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we kind of recovered Kawasi. I mean, I feel like when I started understanding black anarchism, like that is like a term or whatever, it was really inspiring to be like, oh, there was a queer dude that helped break people out of jail and did all this illegal shit. Like that to me was really inspiring. Was I less inspired when we read his book and he talked about his teacher's boob slipping out? So I think I would say I feel like there are anarchist structures that I kind of admire more than individuals. Like I think
I
about
think of Ella Baker immediately.
yeah, like Ella Baker, the Underground Railroad, Fanny. I think about especially
Yeah,
like
you mentioned this casually.
what?
The Underground Railroad was an anarchist project?
I mean, I'm doing research right now and basically planning for a security culture video, and I would make the argument that the modes of direct action they had to utilize are very anarchic. I mean,
Christian anarchism was big at the time, a lot more in Russia and it was here.
networks, vouching people in. I don't fucking know. I have a whole notes about it. Black liberation is anarchic. Like, let's just start there. And so when I look at Black history, I'm kind of like, who are the figures that I lean into the most that help me show up as that? Malcolm X, I think about. People wouldn't really think about MLK, but honestly, when I listen to MLK speeches, I cry. So I don't know what that fucking tells you, but I cry. So many of the Black women throughout Black, like radical and Black liberation history, like I think about, and granted, these are people that were in organizations that wouldn't identify themselves as anarchic, but I think, especially for Black women in the memoirs that I've read, they are a disruption in many of these hyper patriarchal spaces. And that disruption leads them to having deeper questions about their autonomy than I think a lot of the men do. And so that's how I kind of take the question. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I did some research about some early anti-colonial actions that were taken for this video or this episode I did with cool people who did cool stuff about the Spanish Civil War. So I wanted to talk about black people and anti-fascism and anti-colonialism and a lot in like South and Central America and the Caribbean and in the South of just like alternative structures made, anti-colonial like camps and federated structures that there was one in Brazil that I was just like so beautiful to read about. And I'm like, I need to read more about this. There's this book that I downloaded on my phone years ago. If anybody can help me find it, but it was about like state and non-state structures. If there's probably an ethnology book I downloaded like 4 or 5 years ago about the different tribal and state and non-state societies pre, during, and post Africa. And it was like 500 pages. It was a really good book. It was like actually well researched and the author was like respectable. And I was like, damn, why can't I find this again? Because now all I can find is the same old like 70-year-old white ethnologist who's just fucking racist as hell.
I mean, this question makes me think of another question that's on the list. This was also from Instagram. Why do you think Black anarchism often gets left out as a part of the Black radical tradition? This question is from Of the Deed.
I think that it's because of one, anti-anarchist sentiment in the world, and especially in the United States. Like, we have purposely, like, the biggest word for anarchist 100 years ago was to call yourself a libertarian. You think you can do that in America? No, that was on purpose from far right propaganda and economic, like, think tanks for years. Like, I'm talking decades, to take the word libertarian out of our lexicon. That's just like a base level thing of like our culture and like the hegemonic culture around us. And then that just adds so many different layers to naming yourself. And I also think,
I think it has a lot to
yeah,
do with for Black people in the US, assimilation became so much more important, integration became so much more important. The notion of equality and civil rights became so much more important. And that is all a sort of demand for inclusion, a demand to be a citizen. And so if you're leaning more into the church, the nuclear family, trying to establish stability economically, socially through generations, you don't want these little nigglets running around fucking your shit up. What the fuck? We're trying to get civil rights. Why are you robbing banks? We're trying to get civil rights. Why are you going into crack houses and flushing that shit down the toilet and beating people's asses? What the fuck? And so it almost kind of relates to the last question for me, but I think it's like it's not a part of the Black radical tradition. How many Black radicals actually want to be open about sometimes you got to burn this shit down? That's what history's taught us.
it
But I'm
makes,
like in these conversations that we're having today in the Black radical tradition, I just think about the election and how, to me, I'm like, we're all talking about Kamala, what we got to do and the whatever, but I'm like, what about naming the literal other possibility that has basically been the mode of action that has gotten us free, which is violent insurrection?
because people are talking about being radical. They're not talking about being revolutionary.
Is there a difference?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think because you could be a radical progressive who wants to get to the root of the problems and really find out where we've gone wrong systemically, or you can be like, okay, we've had data. You want quantitative or qualitative? Just put it out in front of them and be like, here's what we have to also put the foundations down for a new one. We can transfer some wealth, some power, some things, blah, blah, blah. Or you can be a Black liberationist
Hmm.
and be a part of the Black liberatory tradition, because that's honestly where I found most Black libertarian thought is outside the outside America, where it's in like the Caribbeans and in the South and Central America and in like in Africa and in decolonial revolutions and like anti-invasion like anti-colonial invasion schemas that popped up, um like the Mau Maus and fucking so many more people, where it comes from that autonomous tradition that it's also, you don't, a lot of, if it depends, I do think that there is a very European context to name yourself anarchist, a connection to some of those roots that are like from like Latin languages, Romance languages. So I'm like, there are different names for this all over the world. I mean, my friend just told me last night, I'm pretty sure we have all the knowledge we need to create a new global alternative system. They're just not all in one language. And we just need to up the translation game so we can talk to each other better. Because these rulers are just, they basically just own communication and the levels of how we can communicate with each other.
Yeah.
To trade, because that's really all the economics, all the system is. We just need to know how to get each other what we need.
So you're kind of saying that the Black radical tradition needs to be expanded in terms of language. Or it's, I guess we're currently, I feel like this is kind of why we made this podcast. Like it is currently being expanded. Do you feel like you see this question application today? Is it left out of the Black radical tradition? Do you even agree with
The premise.
yeah, the premise of the question?
I do. I do agree. I do, because I think even folks like, when you look at Martin Luther and who they were around with Bayard Rustin was running around with anarchists a lot. And then there's how ways that they get treated for being gay and being closer to the nonviolent anarchist streak. And
I was learning about the Quaker values of conflict, and now even hearing that, I was like, this feels kind of anarchist to me, like meeting and like the idea of addressing conflict directly with the person that the conflict is
there's
about.
a lot of overlap with the anarchists.
Just like I was like, where the hell am I gonna be a Quaker?
And let's go to this question. How do you think labor organizers can practice anarchist calisthenics in large hierarchical unions?
Quit your job. No, I'm joking. Um, well, that's kind of my first response. Um,
I would recommend checking
well,
out.
one, I think this question's interesting because maybe it's just my mind, but I'm kind of like labor organizers practicing, and I assume this person might mean anarchist calisthenics. I'm just reading into it that way. And then large hierarchical unions. I'm like, anarchist calisthenics and large hierarchical unions don't seem to go together to me. But if you wanted to make the argument, I would say try to push to change certain structures within the union to make democratic decision making more possible. Because my experience in the union work that I did, which was like a year, it very much was like I was a part of the boycott team and I had my boycott manager who had his responsibilities locally and in other places. And then we would report back to the other, like, main larger union group during meetings. And each working group did feel very separate. We did organize with each other and canvas together and other things. But in terms of communally making decisions in a way that felt legible to me, that wasn't there. And so, how did that show up? It felt like at meetings, I'd show up with my boycott working group. My manager would be the main point person expected to talk. And then the agenda was even decided by the higher ups in the union. Like, we would never show up to these like communal working group meetings and like decide the agenda really. And so it makes me think about one, if I'm thinking of the working group unit as a microstructure, how can that be shifted to have more democratic decision making? How can it be shifted to, um, I don't know, better facilitation in the meetings? How can certain roles or responsibilities be switched off so that when you do meet this other system or process of hierarchy, there is something that distinguishes your subsect and allows you to have autonomy? Do I think that's the most useful goal or way forward? Is that in line with my own practice in terms of how I look at labor and some of the conflict I feel with how, in some ways, I think how unions operate now feel like it's getting people practiced in the process of simply reforming the exploitation they experience on a labor level. In terms of eradicating labor, and what that looks like, what kind of modes of organizing you'd have to do entirely out of unions altogether, that's a whole nother fucking question. So that's why I started with quit your job. Am I the most educated on unions? Have I done union work for years? No. But that's my perspective. Keyword, dipped our toes in and got my toes in there.
No,
Saw how fucking rancid the water was and got fucking fired and had to carry my bottle of liquor out of my desk.
And I dipped my toe. But I think the question of that is I don't think it can be anarchist calisthenics because I think it requires a lot more than a calisthenic. Like, I think this is, it's making me think of what Kali Akuno over with the Cooperation Jackson is doing this media series. And actually, this month and the next months are on community production and worker self-organization. I think like I really love how Kali Akuno talks about the current trade union movement as it is, because there is movements like with the Teamsters to have a more democratic union. That's not anarchist calisthenics, baby. That's organizing a whole fucking separate consensus and like a whole separate assembly.
But how do you think anarchist calisthenics can help get people there? Like, I feel like that's what's kind of confusing to me about this question, because I'm like, anarchist calisthenics is like the small things we do to lead to larger action. Do you choose small acts within a structure in order to try to change the structure? Or is the point of anarchist calisthenics to get people in the space of creating their own structures altogether? And maybe there's a middle ground option in there, but that's kind of how I'm looking at this, because I'm like, why use anarchist calisthenics to change large hierarchical unions? Like, just use it to do something else.
I guess it's like if you have a union like that. Some people think
you're
and that's where some people
work
think,
or what do you mean?
yeah, like I've gotten to, I feel like I know the kind of person I would have this conversation with which someone I got into a little bit of an argument with the Chicago Teachers Union, but good folks. But it's like, what can we do outside of the union is a question that a lot of people, even inside of a union, especially a more quote unquote progressive one, don't even want to touch or talk about. Like you were saying, like this, it's so, how can we reform our exploitation? We have what we have now. We can't do clutching our pearls. We need to reach outside of the NLRB. So anything that you can do to educate people about the history of their union and how we actually have what we have, like they gutted the right to strike. Unions are revolutionary. This is back to like the radical versus revolutionary versus reformists. Should we have workers' associations, workers' councils, build whole structures outside of unions to better coordinate our labor together to really build an alternative economy to take down capitalist infrastructure in our life and the investment we give it and it gives us?
Yeah. So this is the end of this Q&A episode. Thank you to all the folks that have sent questions online. We didn't get through everything, so there's definitely the potential for more Q&A episodes in the future. It does feel good to kind of, I don't know, I almost feel like a talk show host or something. I don't know. So it's kind of nice. And I feel like some of these questions did kind of throw me for a loop. Like, are my like prejudices being shown? Yeah. But did I say that I was unbiased? No. So if you want to do union work, I think that's totally valid. I'm just not sure if certain anarchist practices make sense within unions as I've organized in them, and that's just my experience. Do we have any last messages for viewers? Anything's on the horizon that we should let them know about? Anything that you're working on? I mean, you mentioned the cool people who do cool stuff episodes. Do you want to talk more about that? Or is there going to be a Dugout re-upload of that? Or, yeah, you didn't really mention that.
Yeah, so I went on Margaret Killjoy's podcast, Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff, and I told Margaret about some of the black anti-fascists that went and fought in the Spanish Civil War. I actually would just love to sit down and talk to you about that and some other research that I actually wanted to dive a lot deeper into that I was saving for the Dugout. So I think people should look out for that down the line, probably around anniversary stuff.
And I would say for anyone out there, continue liking the podcast. If you listen to it on Spotify, especially, give us a rating. Like, we could have hundreds of ratings because I know there's hundreds of you listening. So rate it or else.
And check out our newsletter over on the Patreon, patreon.com, the Dugout Pod. And yeah, we have a newsletter that comes out monthly. Get yourself some book recommendations, what we're watching, kind of media we're consuming, the news that keeps us alert and on our toes. Any other thing coming down the pipeline for you?
No.
Line.
Okay, everyone. See you later.